The massive Krexan warship Eternal Fang hung in the purple sky above Zephyria Prime, like a metal predator, waiting to strike at the floating crystal mountains that sparkled in the distance through layers of perpetual storm clouds that crackled. With dangerous energy, Captain Xyloth stood on his command bridge watching the latest hunting party return through the docking bay. With empty cages and wounded pride written across their reptilian faces, as another expensive expedition had failed to capture even a single storm dragon from the legendary peaks below. The storm dragons were the most valuable creatures in this sector of the galaxy, worth millions of credits each on the black market for their scales that could power entire space stations and their blood that could heal almost any wound or disease known to galactic medicine. For 3 standard years, the Krexan Empire had sent hunting parties to these floating mountains using every weapon and trap in their vast arsenal. But the results were always the same, with hunters returning empty-handed or not returning at all from the deadly electrical storms. The crystal formations that made up the floating peaks conducted and amplified the natural lightning storms that raged constantly around the mountains, creating an impenetrable barrier of pure electrical energy that destroyed most ships and fried their electronic systems before they could get close enough to deploy nets. Commander Vex approached the captain with his latest damage report showing that 12 more hunters had been lost when their ship was struck by a concentrated lightning bolt that turned their armor into molten metal in seconds while trying to approach a dragon nesting site. The storm dragons themselves seemed to control the lightning, using it as both weapon and shield, as they soared through the electrical storms with graceful ease, while any creature that threatened them found itself targeted by focused bolts of energy that could vaporize solid rock. Xyloth had invested his entire fortune in this hunting operation, and the pressure from his superiors in the Empire was growing stronger each day as they demanded results from the expensive venture that had consumed vast resources without producing a single captured specimen. Meanwhile, in the shadow of the massive warship, a small human research vessel called the Harmony drifted quietly through the outer atmosphere of Zephyria Prime, conducting scientific observations with equipment that seemed primitive compared to the advanced Krexan technology. Dr. Amy Watson stood on the observation deck of her modest ship, studying the storm patterns through her basic scanner, while making notes in an old-fashioned paper journal that she carried everywhere as a reminder of her childhood on Earth. Before she joined the interstellar research program, Amy was not entirely human despite her appearance, as elven blood flowed through her veins from ancestors who had fled Earth centuries ago during the Great Exodus, when humans first encountered other intelligent species, and some chose to blend their genetics with alien partners. Her pointed ears and enhanced senses were subtle reminders of her mixed heritage, but more importantly, they allowed her to hear frequencies that pure humans could not detect, including the haunting songs that drifted down from the crystal peaks whenever the storms grew quiet. The storm dragons communicated through complex harmonic patterns that resonated through the crystal formations, creating a natural communication network that spanned the entire mountain range and allowed them to coordinate their movements across vast distances with perfect precision. Amy had spent months learning to recognize different song patterns and had even begun to understand some of the basic emotional content, as the dragons expressed joy during mating flights or warning calls when predators approached their nesting areas. Her small ship was equipped with sensitive audio equipment that could record and analyze the dragon songs, while her personal flute allowed her to experiment with creating responses that might eventually lead to some form of communication with these magnificent beings. The Krexan hunters viewed the dragons as dangerous animals to be captured and caged, but Amy saw them as intelligent beings with rich emotional lives and complex social structures that deserved respect and protection from those who would exploit them. For profit each day, she positioned her ship near the storm barriers and played gentle melodies on her wooden flute, while recording the dragon responses through her audio sensors. As she slowly built a database of their musical language patterns, the dragons had begun to notice her small vessel and sometimes approach the edge of the storm barriers, where they would hover and sing back to her music, creating beautiful harmonies that made her heart race with excitement at the possibility of actual communication. 3 young dragons in particular seemed drawn to her daily concerts and had begun to recognize her ship as they would approach whenever she began to play her flute, creating a routine that both species looked forward to each day. Amy named them Luna, for the silver female whose scales glowed like moonlight through the storm clouds, and Storm and Thunder, for the 2 playful males who seemed to enjoy testing their aerial skills against the electrical currents that surrounded Their mountain home, Captain Xyloth had noticed the small human research vessel, but dismissed it as irrelevant to his hunting operations, as he could not imagine how such primitive technology could accomplish what his advanced warships had failed to achieve over 3 years of intensive efforts. The storm dragons continued their ancient songs through the crystal peaks while Amy worked patiently to decode their musical language, knowing that understanding these creatures might be the key to protecting them from the hunters who saw only profit in their destruction. Amy woke before dawn, as she did every morning since arriving at Zephyria Prime, and prepared her equipment for another day of trying to communicate with the storm dragons, who had become the center of her research and the focus of her growing determination to protect them. The 3 young dragons, Luna, Storm, and Thunder, had begun visiting her ship regularly, drawn by her daily flute concerts and the small gifts of rare crystals she left floating in the space between her vessel and the storm barriers that surrounded their mountain home today felt different somehow as Amy positioned her ship at the usual distance from the crystal peaks and began playing a new melody she had composed by blending human folk songs with the harmonic patterns she had recorded from the dragon communications over the past several weeks. Luna appeared first, emerging from the swirling electrical storms, with her silver scales catching the purple light of the distant sun as she approached closer than ever before, hovering just outside the range where the ship sensors could detect her presence. Amy continued playing while watching through the observation window as Storm and Thunder joined their companion, creating a triangle formation that seemed deliberate and meaningful rather than the random flight patterns she had observed during their previous encounters. The dragons began to sing in response to her flute music, but this time their song was different, more complex and structured, as if they were trying to match not just the melody but the emotional content of the human music that drifted across the space between their worlds. Amy felt tears forming in her eyes as she realized she was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history, as 3 alien creatures were actively trying to communicate with her, using music as a bridge between their completely different forms of consciousness. She slowly changed her melody, testing whether the dragons would follow her musical lead, and was amazed when they adjusted their harmonies to match her new patterns, proving that they were not simply mimicking, but actually listening and responding with intelligence and purpose. The communication session continued for over an hour with Amy and the 3 dragons, creating increasingly complex musical conversations that seemed to convey emotions and concepts that transcended the barrier of species and language that had kept them apart. Meanwhile, aboard the Krexan warship, Captain Xyloth was planning another hunting expedition using new technology that his engineers claimed could penetrate the storm barriers without triggering the defensive lightning strikes that had destroyed so many previous attempts. Commander Vex presented the latest intelligence reports showing that the storm dragons followed predictable migration patterns and would be vulnerable during their mating season, when they became focused on courtship displays and less aware of potential threats. The new hunting strategy involved using multiple small ships equipped with electromagnetic shields that could theoretically deflect the lightning attacks, while net launchers fired special capture devices designed to entangle the dragons without killing them. Xyloth approved the plan despite its enormous cost, because his reputation and career depended on finally succeeding where so many others had failed, and bringing back live storm dragons to satisfy the demands of his superiors in the Empire. The hunting fleet prepared for departure, while Amy continued her musical conversations with Luna, Storm, and Thunder, unaware that she was about to become caught in the middle of a conflict between 2 very different approaches to interspecies contact. Amy had begun leaving small offerings near the storm barriers, including rare minerals from her geology samples and pieces of crystallized music recordings that she had created using her ship computer to convert sound waves into physical crystal structures. Luna was the first to approach these gifts, examining them with obvious curiosity, before carefully taking one of the crystal recordings back to the mountain peaks, where Amy later heard her own flute melodies being played back through the dragon communication network. The breakthrough came when Storm brought Amy a gift in return, a small piece of living crystal that pulsed with internal light and resonated with harmonic frequencies that made her sensitive, elvish hearing tingle with recognition of something ancient and powerful. Amy realized the crystal was not just a gift, but a communication device that allowed her to hear the dragon songs more clearly, and even began to understand some of the emotional content that the creatures were trying to convey through their musical language. She spent the next week learning to use the crystal resonator and discovered that it allowed two-way communication, as her thoughts and emotions could be transmitted to the dragons through harmonic patterns that the crystal amplified and translated. The first clear message she received was a warning about danger approaching from the metal hunters in their flying ships, and she realized that the dragons were aware of the Crexan presence and saw her as a potential ally rather than another threat. Amy tried to warn the dragons about the upcoming hunting expedition, but found that her new communication ability was still limited to basic concepts and emotions, rather than complex tactical information about the military plans being developed aboard the warship Luna Storm, and Thunder began visiting more frequently, as if seeking comfort and reassurance from their new human friend, while the electrical storms around the Crystal Peaks grew more intense and chaotic, reflecting the growing anxiety of the dragon community. Amy knew she had to find a way to protect her new friends, but her small research vessel was no match for a Crexan hunting fleet, and she had no weapons or defensive systems that could challenge the advanced military technology that would soon be deployed against the dragons. The crystal resonator continued to pulse with urgent warnings as the dragon communication network spread the news of approaching danger throughout the floating mountains, while Amy struggled to understand her role in the coming conflict. The Crexan hunting fleet launched at dawn with 12 heavily armed vessels spreading out in attack formation as they approached the Crystal Peaks, where generations of storm dragons had lived in peace until the arrival of the alien hunters who saw only profit in their ancient home. Captain Xyloth commanded the operation from his flagship, while monitoring the electromagnetic shields that were supposed to protect his ships from the lightning attacks that had destroyed so many previous expeditions against the legendary creatures of Zephyria Prime. Amy watched in horror through her observation screens as the military vessels moved toward the storm barriers with weapons powered and nets deployed ready to capture any dragons they could reach. Despite the obvious intelligence and peaceful nature of these magnificent beings, the crystal resonator in her hands pulsed with desperate messages from Luna Storm and Thunder, who were trying to warn their families about the approaching danger, while the dragon communication network carried urgent harmonics throughout the floating mountain range. Amy activated her ship communication system and broadcast on all frequencies, trying to contact Captain Xyloth to negotiate for the safety of the dragons, but her transmission was ignored by the Crexan commander, who had no interest in talking with a human researcher. The first hunting ship penetrated the outer storm barrier, using its electromagnetic shields to deflect the natural lightning that danced around the crystal formations, but the dragons were ready for this attack and began to sing in unison, creating focused electrical strikes. Amy watched as concentrated lightning bolts struck the lead hunter vessel, overloading its shields and sending it spinning out of control, while the pilot fought desperately to regain stability before his ship crashed into the crystal peaks below. The dragons had learned from previous attacks and were no longer simply defending their territory with random lightning strikes, but were coordinating their electrical attacks through their harmonic communication network to target the most vulnerable parts of each hunting ship. Captain Xyloth ordered his remaining vessels to attack in groups, using overlapping shield coverage to protect each other from the focused lightning strikes while deploying capture nets toward any dragons that came within range of their weapons. Luna Storm and Thunder approached Amy's ship, singing urgent warnings through the crystal resonator while she tried to understand what they wanted her to do. As the battle raged around the floating mountains, with lightning and weapons fire lighting up the purple sky, Amy realized the dragons were asking for her help, not as a warrior, but as someone who could communicate their intelligence and peaceful intentions to the hunters, who saw them only as valuable animals to be captured and sold. She powered up her ship engines and flew directly between the hunting fleet and the Crystal Peaks, broadcasting continuous messages on all frequencies, explaining that the storm dragons were intelligent beings who deserved protection rather than exploitation. The Crexan hunters ignored her pleas and continued their assault, using new tactics designed to separate young dragons from their families, while avoiding the most dangerous electrical attacks that the adult dragons could generate through their coordinated efforts. Amy watched in despair as one of the hunting ships managed to fire a net at a young dragon who became entangled in the energy mesh and began falling toward the Crystal Peaks while crying out in harmonics that made the entire mountain range resonate with grief. Luna Storm and Thunder responded immediately, diving through the lightning storms to reach their trapped companion, while Amy followed in her small ship, ignoring the danger as she tried to help rescue the captured dragon from the Crexan net. The rescue attempt triggered a massive response from the adult dragons, who emerged from the deepest parts of the storm barriers where they had been hiding and began to sing a war song that Amy had never heard before. The crystal mountains themselves began to resonate with the dragon war song, creating harmonic frequencies that interfered with the electromagnetic shields protecting the hunting ships and allowing the natural lightning to strike with devastating effectiveness. 2 more Crexan vessels were destroyed by concentrated electrical attacks, while the surviving hunters retreated to regroup and plan a new assault strategy that could overcome the coordinated defense mounted by the dragon families. Amy managed to reach the netted dragon and used her ship manipulator arms to cut through the energy mesh, freeing the young creature, who immediately rejoined Luna, Storm, and Thunder in their flight toward the safety of the storm barriers. Captain Xyloth was furious at the failure of his hunting expedition and blamed Amy for interfering with his operation, even though her small research vessel had played no direct role in the destruction of his military ships. The dragon war song continued to echo through the crystal peaks as more adult dragons appeared from hidden nesting areas deep within the electrical storms, showing the hunters that they had seriously underestimated the size and organization of the dragon community. Amy received a clear message through the crystal resonator as the dragons thanked her for her help and asked if she would stay to witness what they called the Great Awakening, when all the dragons of Zephyria Prime would unite to defend their ancient home. The surviving Crexan ships regrouped at a safe distance from the storm barriers, while Captain Xyloth considered his options, knowing that his career and possibly his life depended on finding a way to capture storm dragons, despite their intelligence and defensive capabilities. Amy positioned her ship between the hunting fleet and the dragon territory, hoping that her presence might prevent another attack while she tried to establish communication between the two sides before the conflict escalated into total war. The crystal resonator pulsed with new harmonics as hundreds of dragons began to gather in the deepest storm barriers, preparing for a confrontation that would determine whether they would continue to live free in their ancient home or become prisoners in alien laboratories. The crystal mountains of Zephyria Prime began to sing with voices that had been silent for centuries, as ancient dragons emerged from the deepest storm barriers, where they had slept through generations, waiting for the time when their people would need the old powers. Amy felt the resonance through every cell in her body as the crystal resonator in her hands pulsed with harmonics that seemed to reach back through time to when the dragons first learned to weave lightning into song and shape the floating peaks from raw crystal and pure energy. Captain Xyloth watched his scanner displays with growing alarm as massive signatures appeared throughout the storm barriers, indicating dragons far larger than any his hunters had encountered. During 3 years of failed expeditions against what he had thought were simple animals, the Great Awakening had begun as elder dragons, who had not flown for centuries, stretched wings that spanned hundreds of meters and added their ancient voices to the war song that was turning the entire mountain range into a weapon of living sound and electrical fury. Luna, Storm, and Thunder flew close to Amy's ship, singing urgent messages through the crystal resonator as they tried to explain that the awakening was both wonderful and terrible, because once begun it could not be stopped until the threat to their people was eliminated. Amy realized she was witnessing something that happened perhaps once in 1,000 years, when the dragon community faced extinction and called upon powers that had shaped this world before most galactic civilizations had learned to build fire. The eldest dragons were creatures of myth and legend whose scales had grown into living crystal armor over millennia of absorbing electrical energy, while their voices could shatter mountains or heal wounds that defied medical science throughout the known galaxy. Captain Xyloth ordered his remaining ships to retreat to a safer distance as the electrical storms around the crystal peaks intensified beyond anything his instruments could measure, while lightning began to take on colors that should not exist in nature. Amy tried to contact the Crexan commander one more time, pleading with him to withdraw his hunting fleet before the dragon elders decided that all alien visitors were threats that needed to be eliminated to protect their ancient home. The dragon war song grew louder as more voices joined the chorus, creating harmonic frequencies that resonated through the crystal formations and began to affect the space around Zephyria Prime in ways that violated several known laws of physics. Amy's ship instruments registered impossible readings as gravity fluctuations rippled outward from the singing mountains while electromagnetic fields twisted into configurations that her science training said could not exist in normal spacetime. The eldest dragon appeared through the storm barriers like a living constellation with scales that captured and reflected the light of distant stars, while wings that seemed woven from aurora energy carried her toward the Crexan fleet with ancient majesty and terrible purpose. Amy understood through the crystal resonator that this was the matriarch of all dragons on Zephyria Prime, a being old enough to remember when the floating mountains were formed, and wise enough to judge whether the alien hunters deserved mercy or destruction. Captain Xyloth stared at his screens as the massive dragon approached, his flagship with electrical energy crackling around her like a crown of living lightning, while her voice alone was powerful enough to interfere with his ship communication systems. The matriarch sang a single note that contained centuries of dragon history and the accumulated wisdom of her people, while offering the hunters one final chance to leave peacefully before the full power of the awakened dragons was unleashed. Amy felt tears streaming down her face as she listened to the matriarch song through the crystal resonator and understood that she was hearing the voice of a being whose thoughts moved at the speed of geological time and whose memory contained the birth songs of stars. The Crexan hunters had no way to comprehend what they faced as the matriarch hovered in space before their weapons with the casual confidence of a creature that had survived ice ages and cosmic storms while their civilization was still learning to work. Metal Captain Xyloth made the fatal mistake of ordering his ships to attack the matriarch with their most powerful weapons, hoping to capture the ultimate prize that would make him the richest hunter in galactic history. The energy beams struck the ancient dragon harmlessly as her crystal scales absorbed the attack and converted it into pure harmonic energy that she added to her song, while looking at the alien ships with something that might have been pity. Amy screamed a warning through her communication system as she realized the matriarch was about to demonstrate why the dragons had never been successfully hunted by any species in the history of Zephyria Prime. The matriarch sang again, and this time, her voice was joined by hundreds of other dragons as they created a harmonic resonance that turned the space around the Crexan fleet into a maze of twisted gravity and impossible geometry. Amy watched in horror as the hunting ships began to fold in on themselves, not destroyed, but transformed, as the dragon song rewrote the rules of physics in the local area and turned metal and technology into something that belonged in a realm of pure energy. Captain Xyloth found his flagship drifting helplessly through space that no longer obeyed normal laws, while his instruments displayed readings that suggested his ship was somehow in several different locations at the same time. The dragons had not killed the hunters, but had instead transported them to a pocket dimension where they would remain until they learned to understand that some treasures could only be gained through respect and wisdom, rather than force and greed. Amy floated alone in the restored calm around Zephyria Prime as the dragons ended their great awakening and the crystal mountains returned to their normal harmony, while the Crexan hunting fleet had simply vanished, as if it had never existed. The matriarch approached Amy's small research vessel with curiosity, rather than the terrible power she had displayed against the hunters, and began to sing a gentle melody that resonated through the crystal resonator with warmth and ancient wisdom. Amy understood through the harmonic communication that the elder dragon was grateful for her attempts to protect the dragon families and wanted to offer her a choice that no alien visitor had ever been given in the long history of their world. She could remain on Zephyria Prime as the first ambassador between her people and the dragons, learning their ancient knowledge while helping to build bridges of understanding that might prevent future conflicts between species. Lunastorm and Thunder joined their matriarch in a circle around Amy's ship, singing together in harmonies that painted pictures in her mind of what life could be like if she chose to stay among the crystal peaks and floating mountains. Amy felt the weight of the decision as she realized that accepting the dragon offer would mean leaving behind her human life and her career as a xenobiologist to become something entirely new in the galaxy. The crystal resonator pulsed with images of other humans who might one day visit Zephyria Prime seeking friendship rather than profit, and who would need someone to help them understand the dragon culture and communication methods. Amy made her choice and sang back to the dragons using her flute to create melodies that expressed her willingness to stay and learn from them while serving as a bridge between their ancient wisdom and the younger races of the galaxy. The dragons celebrated her decision with a song of welcome that echoed through every crystal formation on the floating mountains, while the storm barriers opened to allow her ship safe passage to a landing platform that materialized from living crystal. Amy landed on Zephyria Prime as the first alien ever invited to make a permanent home among the dragons and began the process of learning their true language, which went far beyond simple harmonic patterns to include complex philosophical concepts. Luna, Storm, and Thunder became her constant companions and teachers as she explored the crystal cities hidden within the mountain peaks and discovered that dragon civilization was far older and more sophisticated than any species in the known galaxy. The dragons shared their knowledge freely with their new human friend, teaching her about the deep connections between music and mathematics that allowed them to manipulate space and time through pure harmonic resonance. Amy learned to sing with the dragons and discovered that her mixed elven heritage gave her a natural ability to understand their language, while her human perspective offered fresh insights into their ancient ways years past. As Amy studied dragon history and science while developing new methods of interspecies communication that could be used when other humans eventually arrived seeking to learn from the Crystal Mountains, the dragons began to trust Amy with their most sacred knowledge, including the songs that had shaped Zephyria Prime from cosmic dust and the harmonics that connected their world to other dimensions, where even older dragons lived. Amy established a research station that monitored galactic communications and watched for signs that other hunting expeditions might threaten her adopted home, while preparing to serve as mediator between dragons and visitors. The first peaceful contact came when a small group of human scientists arrived seeking to study the unique properties of the crystal formations, and were amazed to find Amy living in harmony with creatures they had thought were mindless beasts. Amy guided the new visitors through proper protocols for approaching the dragons with respect, and helped translate between human scientific curiosity and dragon willingness to share knowledge with those who came in peace. More species began to arrive at Zephyria Prime as word spread through the galaxy that the legendary storm dragons were actually advanced beings who welcomed respectful visitors and were willing to share their ancient wisdom. Amy became the director of the first interspecies cultural exchange center in galactic history, as dozens of different alien civilizations sent representatives to learn from the dragons and participate in harmonic research programs. The Crystal Mountains of Zephyria Prime transformed into a center of learning where the oldest wisdom in the galaxy was shared freely with any species mature enough to approach with respect, rather than greed. Amy grew old among the dragons, but never grew tired of their songs as she helped establish permanent, diplomatic relations between the Crystal Peaks and the galactic community, while protecting the sacred knowledge from those who would abuse it. The dragons honored their first human ambassador by teaching her the eternal harmonies that would allow her consciousness to join their collective memory when her physical form finally returned to the cosmic dust from which all life emerged. Amy's legacy lived on in the interspecies harmony she had helped create as humans and dragons worked together to explore the deepest mysteries of the universe while maintaining the delicate balance between ancient wisdom and the curiosity of younger species. The storm barriers of Zephyria Prime continued to sing their eternal songs, but now their melodies carried new harmonies that spoke of friendship between species and the possibility that understanding could triumph over fear in the vast darkness of space.